I think one of the biggest lies we tell ourselves is that starting over takes money. That's what I believed. I thought if I ever lost everything, I'd need another great job, another nice house, another business, another chance. What I found out was none of those things come first. When I left my marriage at 51, I wasn't thinking about retirement. I wasn't thinking about investments. I wasn't thinking about rebuilding my credit. I was trying to figure out where I was going to sleep. People hear me say that I lost everything, but I don't think they really picture what that looked like. I walked away with my old pickup truck and the clothes on my back. That was it. The house was gone. The business I built was falling apart. The future that I'd spent years working toward disappeared almost overnight. I remember sitting in that truck wondering, how does somebody end up here? Not because I was lazy, not because I didn't work. I've worked hard my entire life. I grew up on a farm, graduated from high school with a welding degree, earned a degree in electrical technology, worked maintenance in factories, including many years for General Motors. Got my Class A CDL. Later, became a butcher and then a meat manager. But then I built a successful tree service after doctors told me I probably would never walk again after I broke my back. Hard work was never my problem. Life simply collapsed faster than I could possibly hold it together. For 6 months, that truck was home. People ask me what that was like. Honestly, the truck wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was wondering if this was the rest of my life. Wondering if I'd ever own a home again. Wondering if I'd ever even laugh again. Your mind doesn't stop. It replays every mistake, every decision, and every conversation. You start wondering if somehow this was all your fault. After about 6 months, I found an old camper. It wasn't much, but it sure as hell beat sleeping in a truck. That camper became, my home for a year. And most people would have looked at it and thought I'd completely failed. Maybe I had. But something unexpected started happening. The chaos disappeared. Nobody was screaming. Nobody was wanting to start another argument with me. Nobody was making me feel like I could never, do enough or be enough. For the first time in years, my life got quiet. I was broke, but I had peace, and I had forgotten what peace even felt like. When you're rebuilding from nothing, you stop asking what do I want, and you start asking what do I actually need. Those are completely different questions. I stopped trying to impress people. I stopped worrying about driving an old truck. I stopped caring if somebody judged where I lived. Because when you've actually lost almost everything, you discover just how little most of it actually mattered. Eventually I found 10 acres that I could own or finance. And there wasn't a beautiful house waiting there for me. It was an old single wide mobile home that had definitely seen better days. Most people would have driven right past it, but I saw something different. I saw a place where I could finally start rebuilding. Not rebuilding the life I lost, but building a different one. I fixed things one project at a time, and truthfully, I'm still doing that today. This place still isn't finished. It probably won't be for quite a while because I only make about $1,800 a month. So when I can afford a project, I do it. When I can't, I wait. Sometimes that means saving for months just to buy the materials or finding them. That wasn't always easy, but rebuilding has taught me something. Slow progress is still progress. You know, every fence that I repair, in every room that I improve, in every tree that I clear, and well, every broken piece of it, each have their own place. But every little project I finish reminds me that I'm further ahead than I was yesterday. Maybe not exactly where I want to be, but a whole lot further than where I started. And somewhere during all of that, I realized I wasn't just rebuilding a property or the roof over my head. I was rebuilding myself. You know, I didn't realize it at the time, but rebuilding this old place has been the easy part. The harder rebuild was happening where nobody could see it. For years, my body had been trying to tell me stuff. Well, something. My blood pressure kept climbing. I had acid reflux. Anxiety became normal. Depression became normal. Eventually, my heart started acting up. Every doctor kept telling me the same thing: stress. I've talked about all that before on this channel. But I didn't want to hear it. I thought stress was just part of being an adult. I thought everybody lived like that. And looking back, I couldn't have been more wrong. As the chaos disappeared, something else started disappearing too. The anxiety slowly eased up, the acid reflux went away, my blood pressure improved, and today I'm not taking any medications. I don't even like taking an aspirin if I can avoid it. My doctor was surprised, but honestly, I wasn't. My body had been begging me to leave long before my mind was ready. Then something else started happening. My relationship with my kids got better, stronger. When I left, I made one decision that a lot of people still don't understand. I didn't fight over the house. I didn't fight over now one thing that I've owned my entire life, including my childhood photo albums. Could I have? Maybe. But I knew what that would have done to my children. They'd already been through enough. You know, Walking away cost me everything financially. But keeping a relationship with my kids was worth more than anything I would have won in any courtroom. People ask me sometimes if I regret starting over. No, I don't. I promise you that's true. I just regret waiting so long to do it. Now, don't get me wrong. There's still days I wonder how I'm going to pay for the next project around here. There are still things I want to build. Still dreams I have for this property. Still a small house, that I'd like to build one day. And I'm nowhere close to finished. I still only bring home about $1,800 a month. People don't believe that, but it's true. This isn't somebody standing at the finish line pretending that they have life all figured out. We've all see those people online every day. They're full of crap. I'm still in the middle of it. I'm rebuilding right alongside a lot of you. One paycheck, one project, one decision at a time. And but then a funny thing happened. I started talking about all of this. Not because I thought anybody would care. Honestly, I figured maybe a handful of people would even understand. So I turned on a camera. I talked about losing everything. about divorce, about loneliness, about rebuilding, about finding peace. About the ugly truths that were my life before all of this. And, and also about all of the things I wish somebody had told me years ago. And more importantly, that I would have listened to if they did. Little by little, people started showing up. Not because I had everything figured out, but because they're rebuilding too. I know a lot of you are. And a lot of you are trying to figure out how to even get out to start the rebuild. My best advice to you is if you feel like that's you and you need to get out, then you need to get out. It doesn't matter the cost. But this YouTube channel didn't rebuild my life. It's not what people think it is. It became part of my rebuilding though. Every conversation, every comment, every person who says I thought I was the only one. It reminds me why I started. 4 years ago, I thought my story was over. Today, I realize it was just the beginning. If you'd have told me, back then that I'd be living in an old mobile home on 10 acres, driving a 24-year-old pickup truck, and making videos on YouTube, huh, I probably would have thought I failed at life. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have believed any of it. But today, I don't see failure when I look around. I see peace. I see a place that's slowly becoming home. I see kids who actually enjoy spending time with their dad. I see a man who's healthier than he was when he had all the things he thought he wanted. I see hope. And hope is something money can't buy. And am I where I want to be? Not even close. But I've still got a lot of rebuilding left to do. This property isn't finished. My finances aren't where I want them. And there are dreams I'm still chasing. But here's what I know now. 4 years ago, I had nothing. Well, almost nothing. And today, I have something that I wouldn't trade for every single thing I lost. I have peace. And after everything I've been through, that's worth more than all the money I used to think I needed. Y'all, I'll see you in the next one.